We will now uncover Helena Blavatsky's harrowing warning about your shadow self, the darkest part of you that grows stronger with every act of malice, broken promise, and selfish choice you've ever made, in this life or past ones. According to Blavatsky, every soul has a higher self, seeking spiritual growth, and a lower self, drawn to material desires and fears. When your higher self or higher manas awakens and grows, it naturally begins to separate from the lower aspects that resist this growth. This separation creates what Blavatsky called the dweller on the threshold, a concept she expanded upon from Edward Bulwer Lytton's novel Zanoni. The dweller is a concentration of unresolved karma and unfaced fears. This entity blocks your spiritual advancement, creating obstacles and triggering old patterns until you face what you've been avoiding. It exists as a guardian at the threshold of higher initiation, ensuring that true spiritual advancement only comes after you've honestly confronted and integrated your complete being. In her book The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky describes the dweller on the threshold as an actual entity. It is the ghost of our own sins, our past lives, our unatoned wrongs, a maleficent astral double that coalesces from the dregs of our lower manas, the earthly mind. To Blavatsky, the dweller, this personification of our shadow self, is as real as the blood in our veins, a sentient shadow born from the rupture between our divine and mortal selves. It is not a demon from some external hell, but a manifestation of our own spiritual decay. As she teaches in her book The Voice of the Silence, we must face this shadow before crossing the threshold to enlightenment. When the higher manas, the immortal enlightened aspect, strives to ascend, the lower self, tethered to material desires and selfish impulses, is severed. But this severed fragment does not dissolve. Instead, it lingers, like a vampiric shell that haunts the threshold of enlightenment, feeding on the unresolved karma of its creator. The anatomy of the dweller is a grotesque tapestry of failed spiritual evolution. In the Theosophical glossary, Blavatsky characterizes it as the putrid residue of the lower self, abandoned by the higher manas as it rises toward liberation. Left to wander the astral plane, the realm that interpenetrates our physical world, where thoughts and emotions take objective form, this shell becomes a parasite, a hungry ghost that mirrors the darkest corners of its creator's soul. Here lies the horror. The dweller is you, or rather the you that chose hatred over compassion, greed over generosity, life after life. It is the cumulative weight of every betrayal, every act of cowardice, every moment where the soul chose the path of least resistance. As Blavatsky indicates in her collected writings, every failure to resist temptation, every submission to selfish desire feeds this shadow. It grows stronger, until one day, it blocks your path. But what gives the dweller its dark power? According to Blavatsky's esoteric cosmology, the dweller gains strength through three primary sources. First, the elemental essences of the astral plane. Primitive, non-human intelligences attracted to human desire provide the raw material for its form. Second, the unresolved karmic impressions of past incarnations supply its consciousness with memories and intentions. And third, the dweller draws sustenance from the very fear it evokes in its creator. Like all astral entities, it feeds on attention and emotion. The more the aspirant dreads the confrontation, the more formidable the dweller becomes. This creates a terrible paradox. Those most determined to achieve spiritual liberation are often those who have accumulated the most formidable dwellers. The greater the soul's ambition, the more lifetimes it has spent striving and failing to transcend its limitations. Each failure adds another layer to the shadow. Each compromise with darkness strengthens the specter that awaits at the threshold. The threshold is not a physical place, but a crisis of the spirit. It is the moment when the seeker, having climbed the mountain of wisdom, stands at the gates of illumination, only to find those gates guarded by their own accumulated darkness. Blavatsky's contemporary and colleague, the medium Stainton Moses, learned this firsthand. In 1876, as he chronicled in his private journals, Moses endured a harrowing ordeal, phantom hands throttling him in the night, disembodied voices, hissing accusations, and a pervasive sense of dread that gnawed at his sanity. Blavatsky, in her correspondence with him, identified the cause without hesitation. You face the dweller. It is your own past, your doubts, your pride. Conquer it, or be consumed. Moses survived the trial, but Blavatsky's message to all aspirants was clear. The dweller is the ultimate initiator. No one escapes its gaze. Blavatsky chronicles several manifestations of this confrontation. For some, it arrives as a progressive psychological disintegration, nightmares of being pursued, paranoia, and overwhelming guilt with no apparent cause. For others, particularly those with natural clairvoyance, the dweller manifests visually as a shadowy doppelganger that mocks and mimics the seeker. In the most dramatic cases, like that of Stainton Moses, the entity achieves a quasi-physical manifestation, capable of affecting the material environment. But regardless of its form, the dweller's purpose remains constant, to test the aspirant's readiness for higher knowledge. As Blavatsky writes in The Voice of the Silence, the light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick dark clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate it, like sun sparks light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul is firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not reach the chamber. Its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic heights reach the ear, however eager at the initial stage. Theosophical understanding suggests the entity manifests differently based on the aspirant's level of spiritual development and the particular karmic challenges they face. Blavatsky described how the dweller can take various forms as it tests the seeker's readiness for higher knowledge. At the most basic level, the dweller may manifest through primal fears and instincts. These manifestations are often connected to elemental forces and thought forms created by the aspirant's own negative emotions. This form of the dweller typically confronts beginners in occult practice, those who have awakened psychic sensitivity without developing the discernment to distinguish between projected fears and objective phenomena. While frightening, these manifestations can be overcome through rational analysis and the cultivation of courage. For more advanced practitioners who have begun separating the higher manas from the lower self, the dweller often appears as a reflection of their discarded aspects. In Theosophy, shells refer to remnants of the astral body, and the dweller can manifest similarly, as a psychic remnant that mirrors the aspirant's worst traits. This manifestation knows the seeker's weaknesses intimately and can mimic their inner voice with disturbing accuracy. Many seekers falter here, unable to distinguish between genuine spiritual intuition and the dweller's deceptive whispers. Blavatsky emphasized that overcoming this requires rigorous self-knowledge and spiritual discernment, the ability to recognize truth through direct perception rather than intellectual analysis. The most formidable confrontation with the shadow self involves facing one's accumulated karma across lifetimes. This manifestation transcends individual psychology, showing the aspirant not merely their personal failings, but the accumulated weight of their entire spiritual journey. It reveals patterns of failure that span civilizations and epochs, reflecting the soul's evolutionary path as recorded in what Theosophy calls the Akashic records. As Blavatsky warns in The Voice of the Silence, before thou standest on the threshold of the path, before thou crossest the foremost gate, thou hast to merge the two into the one and sacrifice the personal to self-impersonal. To face this aspect of the dweller is to confront the totality of one's cosmic journey. Every light abandoned, every truth betrayed, every divine gift squandered. Few can withstand this revelation without succumbing to despair. Yet Blavatsky's dark warning about the shadow self is not without hope. In The Voice of the Silence, her manual for spiritual initiates, she offers a path through the shadows. The pupil must become the master, face the dweller as a warrior, armed with virtue. For only the pure in heart shall pass unscathed. She further instructs, "Have mastery o'er thy thoughts, O striver for perfection, if thou wouldst cross its threshold. Have mastery o'er thy soul, O seeker after truths undying, if thou wouldst reach the goal." The battle against the dweller demands three weapons: self-knowledge, compassion, and spiritual will. Self-knowledge requires the courage to strip the soul bare, to confront every hidden sin and unspoken regret. Compassion, not merely for others but for the self, dissolves the dweller's grip, for it is through forgiveness that we reclaim fragmented parts of our being. Finally, the spiritual will, the divine volition that transcends ordinary determination, incinerates the remnants of the lower self. Blavatsky's guidance to her students emphasized, "No one strong in virtue can dread the dweller. It is the coward, the liar, the hypocrite who feeds it. The dweller thrives on evasion, on the lies we tell ourselves. To face it is to reclaim the power we ceded through weakness." In this light, the dweller is not an enemy, but a teacher. It is the universe's merciless professor, forcing us to account for the debts of our soul. The path of confrontation involves specific practices outlined in Blavatsky's teachings to her inner circle. First, the aspirant must develop unwavering focus, the ability to direct consciousness like a laser beam, cutting through illusion. Second, they must master the art of self-observation without judgment or identification. Third, they must cultivate what Blavatsky calls the courage of compassion, the ability to embrace even the most horrific aspects of self with unconditional love. Finally, they must develop surrender, not as resignation, but as the radical acceptance of cosmic law. This confrontation is not a single event, but a process that may span years or even lifetimes. The dweller does not relinquish its hold easily. Each layer of the shadow, when faced and integrated, reveals deeper layers requiring further work. Blavatsky cautions that many aspirants, after initial success against the dweller, fall prey to spiritual pride, believing they have conquered their shadow once and for all. This pride inevitably attracts a more subtle and dangerous manifestation of the dweller. The ultimate victory comes not through destruction but through transformation. The energies bound in the dweller must be reclaimed and redirected. In Blavatsky's alchemical language, the lead of the lower self must be transmuted into the gold of spiritual wisdom. When this process is complete, the dweller ceases to exist as a separate entity. It becomes reintegrated into the totality of the self, no longer a shadow but a source of power and wisdom. Blavatsky died in 1891, but her warning about the shadow self echoes with eerie relevance in our modern age of curated personas and digital avatars. The dweller thrives in the dissonance between our true selves and the masks we wear. It feeds on the guilt we bury, the hatred we disguise as righteousness, and the emptiness we numb with consumption. She warned humanity with her prophecies about our species waging eternal wars and worshipping false idols of wealth and power. As she forewarned in The Voice of the Silence, "If thou wouldst have that stream of hard-earned knowledge of wisdom heaven-born remain sweet running waters, thou shouldst not leave it to become a stagnant pond." Yet the solution remains unchanged. In her teachings, Blavatsky implores, "Rise to your higher manas, for only the divine within can dispel the darkness without." The dweller is not a curse, but a call to awaken, to atone, to evolve. It is the universe's stark reminder that enlightenment is not a trophy to be won, but a birthright to be reclaimed through relentless self-mastery. The dweller on the threshold, our shadow self, is a paradox, both monster and mentor. It guards the gate to our divinity, demanding we prove worthy of the light. So we must ask ourselves, what shadows have we cast? What sins remain unconfessed? Blavatsky instructs in The Voice of the Silence, "Strive with thy thoughts unclean before they overpower thee. Use them as they will thee, for if thou sparest them and they take root and grow, know well, these thoughts will overpower and kill thee." The threshold is not a place, but a choice. Will we cower before our shadow self or step through it? As Blavatsky taught, the greatest triumph is not to conquer the dweller, but to realize it was never separate from you. The shadow self is the unacknowledged part of our being. To face it is to reclaim our power. To transcend it is to become, at last, whole. In the end, Blavatsky's warning is also a promise. The very existence of the dweller proves the reality of our higher nature, for shadows can only exist where light falls. The intensity of our dweller is proportional to the brilliance of our potential illumination. To face the dweller is not just an ordeal but a privilege, evidence that we stand at the threshold of transformation. And beyond that threshold lies what Blavatsky called the eternal now, a state of consciousness where time dissolves, where the artificial boundaries between self and cosmos fade, and where the soul recognizes itself as a facet of the universal diamond. Know thyself, commanded the oracle at Delphi. Blavatsky's teaching on the dweller reminds us that this commandment is not an invitation to comfortable self-reflection, but a summons to the most harrowing and liberating confrontation a human soul can face. For to truly know oneself is to know the shadow as intimately as the light. It is to reclaim every fragment of being we have disowned across the vast arc of our spiritual evolution. And in that reclamation, we discover what the ancient mystics knew, that darkness is not the opposite of light, but its womb. The dweller is not the enemy of enlightenment, but its harbinger. The threshold is not a barrier, but a bridge. The dweller on the threshold appears precisely because we stand close to transcendence. Its very presence signifies our nearness to the threshold of illumination. It calls upon our deeper selves, inviting us, indeed requiring us, to face fully all unresolved aspects of ourselves, individually and as part of humanity's greater family. As Blavatsky reminds us in The Voice of the Silence, look on. What seest thou before thine eye, O aspirant to godlike wisdom? The cloak of darkness is upon the deep of matter. Within its folds, I struggle. The choice is yours. Turn away and let your shadow self grow, or step boldly through the threshold, armed with this ancient truth, that every demon you meet is a disowned fragment of your soul, and every darkness you face is the birthplace of your light. The shadow self is not your end, but your beginning. For in its twisted reflection lies the key to your divinity, forged not by perfection, but by the courage to reclaim every broken piece of who you've been and who you're destined to become.